Good morning, everyone. I just want to let you know that we're so lucky this morning because we have a very important presentation, Shifting Perceptions, Steady Hearts, a compassionate look at Lewy body dementia. And we have the Senior Manager for Support Services at the National Association of Lewy Body Dementia, who is going to give us information that might be a little different than the kind of information that we've had before. So with that, Brandi, would you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then please go ahead with your presentation.
Of course. Thank you, Evelyn. And I'm so grateful to be here with you guys. I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this very important topic. As Evelyn said, my name is Brandi Hackett, and I lead our support team with the Lewy Body Dementia Association. We're an organization based out of Georgia, which may be the accent that you're hearing, but we cover nationwide. So do know that as I share resources and things at the end, that these are available where you are here in the United States. I'm a social worker by background, so you may also pick up on that as we're talking in terms of some of the perspective and experience that we've had, as well as some of the ways that we position care through the organization. So I'll tell you a little bit more about our association as we go along and what we can offer. But we will start sort of in different places. And as Evelyn said, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know Evelyn will be watching that. And I don't mind as we go along or even at the end. If there is a question that is not answered, feel free to reach out to us directly or to Wilma directly, and we'll definitely get back to you as soon as we can. So, again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and we'll go ahead and get started. In terms of the disclosure of the presentation, we always just like to say the information that we provide is for educational purposes only. It does not replace, of course, diagnosis and discussions with medical professionals, any guidance or care that they are offering you. But we do want to make sure that you have a place to start and we sort of can point you in directions for more informed conversations with those professionals. A lot on the agenda today, and we'll go through this, but we will look at what Lewy is. And so we'll talk some very big terms, some of the symptoms that we see, because I think it informs the rest of the presentation and how it will be. And so then we're going to go back, as Evelyn said, I really want to cover the human side of this. So, what is happening to the individual themselves as they're experiencing these changes, to those that are supporting them, whether that be personally or professionally, all of the layers of care that we know need to wrap around a person, and the complexities there, as well as what we know of things like stigma, how miscommunication can play a part, how assumptions and barriers can really be a hiccup to the experience of an individual and a family and what they're comfortable in terms of sharing or not sharing. And so we want to look at ways that we can pivot and make these safe spaces for individuals that are affected. So as we quickly dive in, I like to clarify because I think there's a lot of questions about this one term, the term Lewy body dementia. So we want to say very early on that it really is an umbrella term. We say that a lot in dementia, but this is another umbrella term that really represents two different conditions. One is the easier to explain, so I will start there. So if a person has established Parkinson's disease and they later develop dementia, that is a version of Lewy body dementia. Why? Because the Lewy bodies on the little pink slide that you see. So this clump of abnormal misfolded proteins, alpha synuclein primarily, creates a Lewy body. And so that creates Parkinson's as well as the dementia that's associated. So Parkinson's disease dementia PDD is a form of Lewy body dementia. The other form is sort of the reverse. So if the dementia surfaces first, even if a person has sort of alongside or close in time with a Parkinsonisms, so they do have changes that are similar, but maybe not an established Parkinson's. Both types, because of those primary changes that are happening in the brain, are considered Lewy body dementias. So as we talk about that one term, know that we're talking about both types. Again, it was named after Dr. Lewy, that's where it gets his name, who actually studied in the same lab as Dr. Alzheimer. So I think that's neat to know that you had so much brain power and so many findings in the early 1900s. about the conditions. And a lot of what we know about these conditions really is coming in the last couple decades, as well as we're seeing so much interest in research right now. We know that this can show up in so many ways. And again, this is a little different per person. So you'll hear, as they say, you've seen one person, you've seen one person. So, no, we do see patterns. But as we're thinking about this, I want us to look at the symptoms that can happen. So, cognitive changes or cognitive struggles, thinking, memory, attention. Neuropsychiatric features. This is often what we hear about in a lot of the calls we get are hallucinations, delusions, illusions. The motor features, again, whether that person has established Parkinson's or Parkinsonism, the changes to their ability to get around. Sleep disorders, which can come out in pretty bizarre ways, including REM sleep behavior disorder. And then autonomic dysfunction. This is our brain's sort of city center of handling things that we don't have to think about consciously. So, like, I don't have to go regulate that pressure, Brandi, or ooh, regulate that temperature. My brain and my body sort of naturally wants to do that to keep sort of a level or a balance. And sometimes that becomes dysregulated. And we know in this mix of symptoms that fluctuations can happen sort of in any of these pockets. So sometimes I'll describe Louis as if someone had one of those DJ boards in front of them and they were moving all the levers and all the knobs. So when we talk about different people and different presentation, imagine this DJ board. So my DJ board's going to look a little different than Evelyn's, but also mine's going to look different day to day, sometimes hour to hour, not only within the progression, but also in just the fluctuations that are really hallmark to what we see with this dementia. And I love to show this slide because I think it really visually represents some of the differences between Alzheimer's dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies. And so this is a neuropsychiatric museum borrowed from Dr. Furman. But you'll see just the differences just looking at the colors in the bars. So imagine the lower the bar, think the more difficulty, the higher the bar, the more ability. And so you'll look just at memory, the red bar. You'll see more struggles in Alzheimer's, which is what we hear. That's the hallmark feature. If I were to go man on the street and say, what's dementia? Most people would say people forget things. And so that is often a symptom that we think about, but specifically with Alzheimer's, but we'll see that struggle is more there, those lower bars. As we get over to the yellow bars, you'll see that people with dementia with Lewy bodies may struggle more with that attention span, focusing on a task in order to complete it completely, or executive functioning, managing the day. You'll also see the one, I'll be honest, that I learned the most about working here in the last 5 years are visuospatial challenges, not only of body and space, like where am I compared to what I need to be in my environment, but also things like a lot of the visual changes that can happen with Lewy. So, as you can see, a person with dementia with Lewy bodies may have more difficulties in very different ways than Alzheimer's. We know that for many, receiving a diagnosis is hard. Why? The fluctuations, the up and downness. There's a lot any of us as humans want to justify. Oh, I just didn't sleep well. Oh, I'm just getting over that cold. Oh, he's just having a hard time. Because it's hard because we want to focus on the times we can, not necessarily the times we can't. And if you are a care partner in any level and a person experiencing it, sometimes we're looking at that fluctuation from different angles. So, selfishly, as a human, I want to focus on what I'm doing well. As the care partner in this phase, you may have to set up safety nets and think about the low. And so sometimes you're looking at this very differently. And doctors are cautious. We know, and we'll talk a little bit more about diagnosis, but we know that often there are multiple doctors involved. We know it can take a long time. We know that often it's neurology, and sometimes that's less available, or sometimes that's a waiting process to get into the specialist. And we know that often we're trying to throw darts at it to figure out what this can be. And because it affects so many symptoms and so many systems, sometimes there's so many ologists in place that it's hard to get like the ologists together to say, oh, this is a neurology issue showing up in gastrointestinal changes and cardiac changes and et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes they're doing their best to come up with what a diagnosis could be. And I want us to think about that for a second. Diagnosis is a buzzword right now, and I get it. We're looking at biomarkers and all these ways to know. But what we still find from our seat, especially with such a complex condition, it is the art or act of identifying a disease from that symptom. So I want us to think, I mean, this is a hard process, even for the highest level of professionals, to look at and confirm any condition that we experience. And often, as we know, these changes that we have aren't in a vacuum. It's not like I'm only dealing with blank. I'm dealing with blank plus, 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 whether those be chronic conditions, acute conditions, et cetera. And so often there is sort of that process of diagnosis, which we're familiar with, but it's that experience. And then we finally engage with that healthcare professional. We know sometimes there's a gap there. I'll tell you, I go quite a few days before I decide to involve a doctor in a lot of ways. So we have changes, then we involve professionals. Then that professional with us is receiving information, providing information, integrating scans, looking at things a different way, maybe pulling in a professional or another specialist. And so it is this puzzle making of integration and interpretation. And then they say, we think this is this. Then sometimes there's treatment. And then sometimes the treatment will give us more content to look at back in that integration. And so again, diagnosis is fluid. It's more fluid than we like to think. And it often will take much, much more time than we think it should. But
Mm.
I wanted just to remind us because I think this is a struggle and a frustration we hear a lot about. I'm not saying it doesn't need to improve. And I think we're all in the dementia care space positioning in ways to clarify this. Research is positioning in ways to clarify this, but this is still very much a human experience of human professionals and human beings that are experiencing very complex changes. And so as we dig into the person, I have the sincere pleasure of sharing space every single week with individuals that have this diagnosis. As I tell them in the group, I hate why I know them, but I am so grateful to them. They are incredibly transparent. They're vulnerable. They have fears, they have joys, and they share a lot about what this is like on the inside. And I don't think we get that perspective enough. Again, sometimes we're looking at it from different angles. I love that one comic that has like the 6 and the 9 and people are disagreeing because they're looking at it from a different angle. Um, but really to share space with individuals that are themselves diagnosed and to hear about these changes. And I want us to think as we're just focusing on the slide for a minute, as a human being with goals for today, goals for next week, plans for a year from now, things that we're hopeful to do once we retire, all of these things that sort of keep us going. Um, Thinking about having this, or you may have this, you may be on this call and it's something that you're diagnosed with yourself. But thinking through all of these things that are on the screen, you know, any one of them would have its own unique challenges, and it does have its own unique challenges. So, a symptom that can happen with Lewy is changes or loss of smell. Smell is a sense of joy in a lot of ways, not always, but often a sense of joy, that whole baking cookies kind of concept. Um, our motivation, our ability to say, I want to do that, I'm gonna do that. It's that inner oof that carries us. Physical changes. I could do X. I have one gentleman that I support that loved walking his dog. And because of this cluster of changes, really struggled with that until he found some support and other ways to still accomplish that task with what I call some pivots. Hallucinations and delusions for many with this, they've never experienced seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching things that others aren't experiencing. And so many people, this is the first time their brain is playing tricks. And for those that are experiencing these changes, it is as real as me talking to you right now. So it is a brain lie that gets in there and gets stuck. And it can be pretty mean. I'm going to be honest. One of the delusions we support, which is so painful for the person to experience, but also for care partners, is accusations of infidelity. And
Mhm.
just that one issue. We also have one called cat bra or cat grass, where I literally don't recognize the person in front of me as that person. It's almost like a replication or a duplicate of that person. And so I may say like, "Where's my where's my husband?" No, not you, my real husband. And how painful that is for the person who is frightened because the person that they care about isn't where they think they should be, and frustrating too for the person who wants to say, "But I am that person. You're safe. It's okay." While the brain is lying in ways that they never experienced and ways that a care partner has never had to support. The cognitive changes, we have individuals that we support that were highest level executives. Multitasking was their superpower. And to really face those changes, to be able to have conversation, friendships, communication, looking at oneself differently. The sleep issues. Sometimes sleep issues with ours results in sleeping in different beds for the first time in an entire marriage. Sometimes it's having dangers in a time when you're like, man, could my body behave while I'm actually sleeping? Maybe not, because the switch in the brain that keeps you from moving during your dreams isn't working as well. So a person may wake up with a bloody hand and be like, man, I'm worried about the day and now I'm worried about the night. Um, we all have future plans, and this can really throw a wrench in a lot of things. This could be forced early retirement. This could be I drive and now I shouldn't. This could be my child just met who would be their future spouse, and I don't know what that's going to look like for me when their relationship changes. There's different expectations of the person, there's different perceived abilities, and it can be tough for any of us. So if I have moments when I struggle and moments when I'm better, more myself, again, looking at that differently from the care partner and the person. So I'm going to want to maintain certain things that I want to do in my day. But if you're watching that and saying, well, she messed up her meds yesterday, or she had balance issues yesterday, and today I'm not struggling with that. And so, again, it's a lot of ebb and flow in terms of what this can look like, how abilities can actually show up, and also how they're perceived. And I find as care partners, my father is struggling with some things as well. And so to go in, you want to sort of rush in and help. And I think it's so well intentioned. But again, when you're dealing with this and so are they, sometimes when you rush in, it's going to be too much help. Other times it may not be enough help. And so it's how to find those structures and balance and all the communication there. And we hear so many times, because this dementia looks different, because there are maintained abilities in a lot of ways for so much longer than other dementias, we get all the time, you don't look like you have dementia. And in those good moments, yeah, the care partner goes, I, I thought yesterday was so hard. Why is today easier? And so it can feel, I say this with love, almost manipulative to the person as they're experiencing, but also to the care partners and also to the world who's trying to figure out how to make these changes to best support. And so we know often with individuals that we are really wanting to focus on strengths, and we want people to focus on our strengths when they think about us. So, what can be done independently? What can be done with accommodations? And what really requires assistance? And looking at this ebb and flow over time. And so sometimes we focus so much on what can't be done or what the person cannot do. And there are real safety nets that need to be wrapped around some of those deeper struggles. And then also making sure that we're looking at what can be done, what they can continue to participate in and be a part of and independently handle in some ways. And in saying all of that, so we're going to put that here, and I want to look at care partners. And I talk about a little bit on this slide about familial care partners or people that are personal care partners, but I also want us to look at the professional lens of this because, you know, we're watching someone that's really struggling. These could be new, these are varied, this could be unexpected. There's a lot of, I will say, I use the word denial in this because it's tricky. It's manipulative in terms of these fluctuations. So, like, is there an issue? Is there not an issue? And it's struggling to accept, like, what is this that we're now dealing with? And there's a lot of confusion in the inconsistency. There's also a lot of doubts and misunderstandings, and I don't blame it in terms of what one is looking at and what may be different. And there's so many impacts on, again, often this is a dyad situation, whether it be spouse partners, whether it be best friends, whether it be um, adult children and parents, whether it be roommates. It's often affecting more than the individual. And that can look so different in different places. But what it does, it sort of throws a rock in a pond. And so we see those ripple effects that can happen throughout. And so it does change in many ways what life is looking like, what retirement is looking like, what travel looks like, what jobs may be appropriate, volunteer hours, care of children, interactions with children, all of that. And we know anytime that anything faces us, we want a plan. We want a predictability to it. What safety nets again do we need to set up? And that sometimes can be really forward thinking and based out of a lot of fears and a lot of protections and a lot of loss. There's a lot of loss in this, a lot of anticipatory grief in this. And so there are things that we are future scared of and future grieve. And there are things that we actually grieve in the changes that are happening. And so some of that is future grieving and some of that is actual loss. And really sitting in that and understanding that those changes are there. And here we go again, what makes sense for now. And so this moving target is exhausting. It's exhausting to feel and it's exhausting to support. It's really hard for individuals and families, especially to wrap around professional support because in the best of moments, it's too much. In the worst of moments, it may not be enough. So when we talk to individuals and they're like, I don't know if we need to do independent living, assisted living, memory care, because we know there are some days and moments where memory care is very appropriate and other days and moments where it's maybe not. And so, as professionals looking into these solutions, how do you build care, supports, safety nets around something that can change this much and have so much fluctuation? And we know it's the balance of protections and avoiding reducing risk as well as honoring the person, their independence, their privacy. And it's the real balance of all these things. And again, a very much moving target. And we know, just like any condition, this is complex. We do know there's gazillions of providers involved in one way, shape, or another. And when I talk providers, I'm talking about hairdressers. I'm talking about volunteer managers, if that person's still. I mean, this is a cluster of people that are involved. And then we think about healthcare. We think about personal care. We think about the care of the home. There's so many people and things involved. We know the systems are tough. Healthcare systems, especially insurance providers, and who's in network, and what person needed to call out, and what specialist is the only one that does this, or what how long it takes to get into here, and the person no showed or never got a call back, or we know it's just a hard system. um, Somebody asked me what I did pretty recently, and I said, well, I'm sort of a medical system interpreter of sorts. And so they were like, and they were like, well, you've got job security. And I said, yeah, I feel like the only issue to that is when I feel confident in it, something changes. And so again, just like everything else, it's a bit of a moving target how that works for the family and how that works as providers as you're trying to wrap those individuals up with care. We also know what is affordable. That can also shift. And not only what's affordable, but what's accessible, what's available, what's in close enough proximity. Where they meet the right criteria, where they can check off the right boxes, where they're far enough in their progression or not far enough in their progression to appropriately fit. And we know there's a lot of options that are out there. And we also know there's a lot of individuals that perceive there are options. So I'll give it one example of this. We'll have a family that'll say, like, we'll just bring in round the clock care. Love that in concept. Have you priced that out? Do you
Mhm.
know what providers are available in your area? Um, is your person or will they be, I'll say, accepting of that? Are there other options that do things? What happens if that person calls out? What happens if you do this version of that versus this version? What systems may be covered financially? What benefits could be there? And so, what we tend to find out is that often there are options and there are perceptions of options and sort of mapping through that. And as we know, we do not have a set of stages that we support with Lewy, so we don't have stage 1. This happens and it lasts this long because we see such variation. And
Mhm.
in that, we know progression can vary. It can be a very different disease process for someone in their 50s to be diagnosed versus someone in their 80s. Someone that has multiple, what they call comorbidities, other things that are going on, other things that are complicating. We also know sometimes this is a mixed dementia with something like Alzheimer's or something like FTD. And so all of that can play a part. And as we know, some safety risks can also affect progression. So if there is a fall with head injury, what that could look like. And we know it's a swirl. So again, we're sort of all riding this swirl out, both as individuals and with those supporting. I gave this little tiny list. Sorry, it's small print, but it's had to be to get everything on it. But again, there's a lot of people involved. And so often these individuals and their supports are sort of the center of this wheel that is surrounded by all these providers. And again, there may be professionals hired, like aging life care managers, and there's dentists for oral care, and neurologists, and pharmacists, and potential surgeons, and organizations like ours, or organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, or other. But there's again a ton of people. So just wanted to show that there's a lot of things, a lot of players in this game. And we know with Lewy, unfortunately, we do not have anything right now that modifies. We have a lot of things that can treat symptomatically. And often the treatments are sort of in buckets. So the medication may help a specific sort of what I call symptom bucket. So there may be things that help with sleep. There may be things that help with more hallucinations and delusions. There may be things to help with cognitive changes. And so sometimes the treatments are attached to the buckets, if that makes sense. And one of the best tools that we can offer as an organization is a new tool to us. I think it came out last year based off of a tool out of the United Kingdom that it has been modified for here in the US called the Diamond Lewy Management Toolkit. So if you are an individual or a family or a personal support, this is a great tool to take to physicians, medical appointments. If you are in that care field and let's say you're working in a nursing home or a skilled nursing and you're like, how, where does one start with symptom management? This would be a wonderful tool for you guys to sit down in care planning to say, hey, this is a primary symptom that's increasing risk. Are there treatments that can help to manage those symptoms? And we know that treatment is well beyond a pill that you take. So often those that we support sincerely benefit, sincerely improve their quality of life, sincerely improve their levels of independence and maintaining ability through occupational, physical, and speech, through connecting with social work, whether that be resource navigation or therapy, counseling for all involved, for care partners, personal care partners, for individuals themselves, palliative care when that's appropriate, sort of setting the tone for that and looking for providers, hospice for things when more advanced stages are coming. There may be specialty neurology like movement disorder specialists if those are symptoms that you're looking at. Neuropsychology, and of course, support groups and support connections are really key. And as you're going What we hope is that you can find ways to know that, again, Louis is different. And these are some things as we go through the stages that can be helpful. So, in terms of diagnosis, really, how does one document these symptoms? How do you look at fluctuations and write that down and talk about that? It's important for medical providers to know yesterday was X and today is Y because something can happen. It's not special to our dementia, but we see a lot of it. It's called show timing. And I think of it as cleaning house for company. I want to show my best self. So my house isn't always clean, but if I knew Evelyn was coming over, I'd clean it up. So I want to show my best self to someone else. And I think that's what show timing really is I want to show my best self. So if that person I'm talking to is a doctor, I want them to see me here, not here. If that person may be that adult child, I wanted them to see me here, not here. And so often we can pour all of our fuel into one space and really, I hate to say perform. I don't think it's faking it. I think it's really demonstratability in a small amount of time. And so that can be really confusing. So if I go to the doctor and I'm saying, hey, neurologist, I'm having these changes, and then I go and I don't look different, that can be hard to treat and hard to manage. And also, you'll see a care partner in the back going, I'm so glad he's doing well today, but yesterday was a bit of a nightmare. Or the person themselves, wanting again to put their best face forward, but really struggling with things on the back end. But once you know more and can help to sort of diagnostically clarify what type of dementia it may be, that really helps you look at what providers are best involved, what providers should know and would know. It can help to prepare for specialty appointments. It can also help to qualify for services. Like a lot of people do not know that Lewy body dementia actually is under the compassionate allowances umbrella with Social Security. So it's important that sometimes certain clarified diagnoses can help with eligibility for certain things. We also know that there's a lot in terms of care coordination. So, like what care is sensitive and sort of knowing people that may know, what providers may know, and what information may they need to know. I encourage families to introduce providers with content that they found helpful. And I encourage providers to introduce families to content that they found helpful because it really takes some humility. It takes a lot of humility to know that we all have things to learn, all of us. And like I've said a million times and about different things, this is a moving target. I've been in this chair helping families for 5 years. There are things that are just now rolling out. So there may be a webinar that I watched that we produced a couple months ago on X, and I'm like, oh, and I start thinking about all the calls, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have had this with that call 3 years ago, kind of thing. And so again, content is always evolving, research is always evolving. So we have to know that we are learning together. We also know that local resources are available. We need to proactively plan for care, and we also want to proactively reduce risk. Fall prevention, emergency planning, and home safety are key, regardless of the type of dementia. It's very important. And we know that we want to focus on quality of life. You should have heard me in this message, but one of the things that we focus on is I don't necessarily say person diagnosed, person diagnosed, person diagnosed. That's a point in time. What we try to say more than that is a person living with Lewy, because the living with is a lot more days and Tuesdays than just the point of diagnosis. And so we know that in those living with days, there's a lot of ways to engage. There's a lot of ways to meet our psychosocial needs as humans as that dyad, as well as individuals. We know that there are therapeutic connections out there. There are ways to stay physically involved. There's ways to stay mentally involved. There's all kinds of ways to stay spiritually engaged and finding those ways to continue to tap in, even if it requires pivots, a different way of looking, a different way of handling it. And we know that finding that funnel, narrowing the funnel can be helpful. So there's wonderful things from the organization giving you this webinar today for all caregivers of all types. And as that funnel gets a little bit more narrow, we have support groups for care partners of just people living with Lewy. We have support groups for people just living with Lewy. And we know sometimes that narrow funnel gives a different space of support. And so finding that can be helpful. And we also know being able to advocate at hospital bedside is important and proactively as much as possible to have information on the ready to share, to try to empower individuals to advocate at bedside for changes, and of course, to share Diamond Louie if that's appropriate. And we know as symptoms advance, which with any progressive neurological condition, including ours, can happen, is that things like palliative care and hospice can be available and how to help best inform those providers of this diagnosis, et cetera. We always like to say even that requires some education on behalf of family to provider, solely because a lot of the things that are in the hospice toolbox, for example, like the EAT kit, may not be the right med in the toolbox for the person living with Lewy. So helping them to also understand treatment. And we want to look for changes and we want to honor things, the wishes of that individual, as well as help to coordinate end of life request. And so I'm going to pivot quickly to talk a little bit about what we do at LBDA, but very proud to be part of this team and our mission. And you'll see that here on the screen. And we really have a three-pronged approach to that, where we focus on education, on helping people to connect with research and helping researchers in this field to feel empowered and emboldened to really take on this cause. And then again, I'm proud to represent our support team to really sit in the mud with families virtually through either email or our helpline. We have a tremendous amount of educational materials. You'll see that through our website. We also have something called our Lewy Learning Center, which is a learning platform where you can go on and almost take classes on LBD and LBD related. One of my colleagues created a recent course with a couple videos on intimacy, on maintaining intimacy in those romantic partnerships or even within friendships and other things with that close connection you want to maintain. So there's great courses there. We also have a YouTube page called LBDA TV where we store all of our past webinars. So you can check that out. And again, you'll have these resources after. And then many people, if they're familiar with anyone that was diagnosed with Lewy, and it was upon his death and autopsy, but Mr. Robin Williams. And so the movie Spark is available if you wanted to check that out. It's a wonderful learning moment. It's also really sad. I think I've seen it now 10 times. I have cried 10 times. It is just, I think Robin is my generation's Bob Hope. And so he is tremendously missed, but so proud of what his wife Susan has done to really spread awareness and part within this film as well. We also have research centers of excellence. So we have now over 25 throughout the United States that are really trying to focus and engage individuals specific to this. Our Lewy Trial Tracker helps people to connect with research. And then here, selfishly, this is how to get back in touch with us and support. So we have our helpline. It is a helpline, not a hotline, as I explained. So you just give us a call and leave us a message, and we do respond. We are based out of the East Coast, so our hours are business hours, East Coast. You can also drop us an email, and we can set up a time to talk, which is sometimes easier, especially if there's a coastal difference. But we are here. And we are here not only for individuals, we have so many calls from people themselves that are experiencing changes, whether they're diagnosed or not, but they're care partners, professional or personal. But we have the one thing that surprised me as we started looking at data, we have so many friends that call, which I love. So a person that, my old sorority sister is having these changes and I want to be able to help her. Those kinds of calls are just beautiful to hear because, again, I do think it takes a village in a very different way. But do know we are available if needed. We also have Facebook pages that are closed, which is a weird way to describe something that's open to people, but it's closed, meaning you do have to answer questions and be approved to get in. But we have one for care partners, one for those, again, living with Lewy or those that are clarified diagnosis. We have one for bereaved caregivers as well as newly Lewy. Now, these are limited to a familial resource. So this has to have to be a personal caregiver, not a professional caregiver. We also have our support groups, and you can check that out. We have quite a few for care partners, and we also have quite a few for those that are diagnosed. And so, if you have any questions about those options, you can let us know. We also have our Lewy Buddy program, which is a one-on-one or two-on-two. We do have a dyad support couple that supports other couples that we make connections. Now, these aren't crisis managers or care managers, those types. They really, what I call, hold the flashlight. So they've been there and they sit with you on your journey and they're there more like a buddy or a friend. And we also have, of course, big Facebook. So Maine LBDA has Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So please check us out. And I just appreciate your time today. And thanks for letting me share.
Wow. What a lot of lovely information, very personal. Um, I have some questions.
Sure.
If other people, here's one from Eva Durham. My sister had LBDA and she saw a lot of sexual acts that were not real. Is that something particular? Um, so I'm sorry, I lost it. Something particular to LBDA.
Mm. Um, from my chair, and again, I haven't talked to the 1.4 million that experience, but from my limited chair in the last 5 years, I have had a few. Um, and that layer can be especially complicating um, because there's some taboo around it. It can also be complicating in a couple of the situations where the person has a history of um, unwanted sexual encounters, abuse, etc. Um, we've also had situations where if it's a spouse, what they're seeing again is real to them, and they disclose this to the spouse, and the spouse has a harder time determining is this something they actually did or not. So the reality in those situations can be complex. So I'm not sure of the exact situation that you experienced, and I'm so sorry to hear that with your sister. But we do hear it at times. I wouldn't say it's frequent, but it can be part of that altered perceptions that can happen with Louie.
Other questions for Brandy? It was a lot of information presented very well.
I have a question. First of all, I want to say amazing presentation.
Thank
Wow.
you, Carolyn.
I was taken back. I need to listen to it again and probably again because it's a lot. We don't know much about Lewy body and I have my friend has her mom. She's 95 years old. They say she has dementia,
Mhm.
but we have our doubts in reference to that. But she does go through moments um of seeing things she has a let's say she has an imaginary boyfriend that
Mhm.
she really believes he's going to come and pick her up, and she'll get up at 1 at 2 or 3 in the morning and wait for him at the door.
Mhm.
It is so difficult because the daughter doesn't know exactly how to help, what to do. So, listening to you, I'm wondering, is could it be Lewy body? I don't know because we have been really discussing it and we're like, I just don't know. What do you advise us to do and how can we get more information in reference to this?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry. It's I think one of the hardest things from my seat in supporting is to her it's real.
Yes.
And often what we
Yes.
find and what's really hard to support and to describe and to wrap around is um when it's that real as care partners, personal care partners, what makes sense to us is if I can convince them that that's not real, then they'll
Hmm.
settle down. Does that make sense? Like if I could just tell her that's wrong or tell her that that's not real, then they'll be fine. And the unfortunate part is the brain is so powerful. And in those moments, the brain is, I always say you have to imagine like sometimes in cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about the triangle of emotion and cognition and behavior. And I
Hmm.
tell families in those moments, imagine you have the biggest nail and the biggest hammer, and imagine it is stuck in cognition or thoughts, and just bang that hammer. So imagine that is the one thing you're not going to change is their thinking in that moment, the fact
Right.
that they think that's real. So then
Right.
what could we change on that triangle? So what we can change is behaviors and emotion. And so that's what we try to focus on. And so, in those moments, taking a step back as a care partner and saying, what would be helpful to me if this was what my brain was telling me? And so, often what people need is they want to feel heard and understood and safe and loved. And so, what pieces of that can one lean into?
Mm.
And so, oh, looks like you're frustrated. You're trying to wait. Let's see. Why don't I give a call in the morning and see if we can get him on the call on the phone to see? So sometimes it's leaning in.
Hmm.
Sometimes it is sort of confronting it head on, especially if it's a safety issue. So it can be a little different. One beautiful thing about a lot of resources out there, including ours, is if it sort of acts like Louis, sometimes our resources and our information is good for that. So even if you don't have a label necessarily, you may benefit. Like we have a really good section on supporting hallucinations and delusions. So that
Uh-huh.
would give some tools that a family could use regardless of the label. And so I think looking at what tools do I need versus what label do we require may be just a helpful positioning for that.
Mm.
And again, if you reach out, we can narrow those tools down for you and say, look at these couple things and maybe try these things.
Mhm.
But I would focus. mm, I mean, it's important to focus on a clarified diagnosis. I don't want to brush that off. But on the
Right,
flip end, it's what in the moment at 3 a.m. It's what tools could I pull from my tool belt to
right.
try to help. And so I think as long as you can focus on the fact that you are not there at 3 a.m. to change her mind, you are
Mhm.
there to provide loving support. Again, loved, safe, heard, understood. And really focusing on that target and pulling back and say, what would help me? The
Mm.
example I give, which I think is the most transparent to see, is if I thought I was getting chased by a bear, Carolyn, you couldn't come to me and say, there, Brady, there's no bear, eat your breakfast. If
Mm.
I sincerely thought I was getting chased by a bear, it's going to be more important for you to come to me in that moment and say, I know you're scared. I know you're scared. Let me handle the bear.
Right.
Let me take care of the bear. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to double lock the door. When I get done, I'm going to come back and make sure I get you a cold cup of water because you have been running.
Mm. Mhm.
That's a whole different
Absolutely.
thing. It can feel goofy. Honestly, it can feel goofy, but
It's their truth.
there's something you got to pull down that emergency code. You got to pull it down and say, what's really going to be beneficial? Is it more important for me to say there's no bear? Will that get me anywhere? To her, there's a bear. Doesn't matter what I think. But if
Right.
I can pull that down just enough to let her feel safe, then I've got some wiggle room to work with. But if she's here, I will jack you up if you don't believe me. You know what I'm saying? We will fight. And a lot
Mm.
of times if we can just convince people to say, let's figure out how to pull that down just a hair,
Mm.
then we can shift a little. But if you're on high alert, there is
Yeah.
nothing. If I thought I was getting chased by a bear, I will crawl over you to do what
Abs
I need. And I'm not making light
abs
of it, but that's the example that I try to think through that if
Mm.
this was a bear, what would I need?
Mhm.
And pulling that down is vitally important.
Okay. Great, great, great analogy. Great,
Mm,
great. Yeah. We've been dealing with this for, I would say, over close to 2 years.
mm,
Yeah, yeah. And when I sit with her, she'll tell me, I'm leaving today at 6, so I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And I tell her, that's fine. So when you leave at 6, that's fine. And if he comes, I'll just open the door and you could go with him. And if you're not here tomorrow, I won't come then. And then she
mm.
stays, she stays calm. Like, okay. Like she
Yeah,
listens to me. Yeah. Because he's
yeah.
not gonna come.
Well, and just imagine in those moments if you said, I have told you every day there is no one coming from
Right.
and I get that level of frustration. You know, I get when people say like they keep bringing it up. Why do they keep asking me? And as a human, like we all have our threshold of what we can handle. I don't blame care partners for feeling like they're backed into a corner. But on the flip side, if we can slow ourselves down to say, again, what is the real ask here? And then what can we do to help? What's going to get me what I need, honestly? And that is not confronting it head on often. So, but thoughts for you, Carolyn, and who you're supporting and
Mm.
anything we can do tool wise, we're happy to help
Good.
provide directly.
Great, great. And hopefully we'll get that presentation so that again I could see it and I've written some of the the your websites.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we'll see. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Brandy. It was excellent. Excellent.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thank
Thank
you, dear. And thank you for a great question, even though a difficult situation.
Right. And folks, you will not be getting this slide clip. What you will be getting is some resources, and you can call anytime, as Brandy has stated, from so many resources. They have a bank of resources. It's so wonderful. So give them a call if you need something special, and don't try to rationalize with people who aren't in their rational mind, because that never works. Never works. I'm an old social worker, very old.
Yeah, no, no.
I
But I
would say,
get why you want to do it, you
yeah,
know?
right. Mhm.
I get it.
Brandy, I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
How can people get the um, Diamond Louis Management
Hmm.
Toolkit?
Yeah. So I will scroll back, and so we'll take a look at what your sort of the image you're going to look for. I think I went too far back. Just give me a second. But so the Diamond Louis is on our website. So if you go to LBDA, you can actually just use the search tool and type in the words Diamond Louis. So that's unique enough as a title. But if you use the search bar, it'll take you to the information directly. And we have sort of two, I'm not going to say versions, but we have one that's sort of a summary, think about a one pager of it, and then one that's a deep dive. It's like 20-ish pages. So know that there's two things you can find on that link. Both are really helpful. Sometimes you just need that one thing to push across the table to say, hey, let's chat about this. And then other times you're like, but let's pull up the PDF and flip through, flip through. And so sometimes having both is really helpful. But yeah, it's on our website. It's a wonderful resource. I'm so proud of the creation of this with our education team, as well as the providers that really jumped in to create a resource for us here in the US.
Thank you. Can't wait to see that. Also, I wanted to ask you about the Social Security Administration's
Mhm,
um, comp allowance for LBD. I didn't know
mhm.
about that.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people are familiar with Social Security disability, and we know that our dementia will affect people typically 50 and over. I've supported some from my seat as young as their 30s, as well as over 100 and everything in between. But for some individuals, they do stop work and they do need to file for disability benefits through Social Security. And so Social Security has a program called Compassion Allowances that has help to streamline the process. That's about as far as I'll take it. You can check it out on their website, but there are certain conditions in which they smooth out the proof that's needed that that is a disabling condition. And
Mm.
so Lewy body dementia is on that list. You can search. They actually, if you go to Compassion Allowances, I think at SSA.gov, and go, it'll show you the full list of conditions that are eligible. And then you can search by, it's alphabetized. And you can go, and then if it's Lewy that you have diagnosed, often that can be factored into the application process. It is not a guarantee, meaning like you put this in and you get it tomorrow kind of thing, but it can be helpful because we know it's a process and it's an application, but it can be helpful to sort of smooth out some clarification around that, the diagnosis and proof of disability.
Okay, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, as a fellow social worker, I just want to tell folks that one of the most important things you can do is planning. Planning is get your finances in shape, see your lawyer, do the things that you need to do so that you feel more comfortable about what the future is going to bring, even though it's totally unpredictable. Even emergency planning. What if something happened to you first, or to all of the caregivers that was taking care of your person? So plan, and we have a lot of good podcasts on planning for end of life care, and by many different experts. So please take a look at our www.caregiverteleconnection.org and open up the podcast, and you will see there that you can explore so many different types of recordings that have happened in past sessions. And I guess with that, I just want to thank every single one of you. Oh, wait, I have one more chat here. Oh no, that's the old one. Okay. I want to thank you all for what you do every day. Such a hard job. Here is the post-session survey, and we are hoping that you will fill it out. Let us know how we did. We're always trying to improve, and you help us all the time to do that. I also want you to know that if you did not register for today, but you got the information from someone else, that you will need to call our customer service representative and get registered for the caregiver teleconnection. And that number is 866-390-6491, 866-390-6491. And it's really important because this is an infomercial here. You'll not only get the resources from Brandi's presentation, but you will also get our monthly calendar, which will tell you how to register for the upcoming events. And we still have one left this month. And this should be very interesting for people in Texas. On Wednesday, the 29th, we have Texas guardianship, how to avoid it and how to prepare for it with an attorney. So, and there'll be many more coming in, a few more coming in December. We can do it lightly in November and December, but we just want to thank you all for what you do, for being here, regularly. It's so wonderful. We've got our own community of people who care for someone else. And with that, I will stop the recording and thank you all so much for being here. And I want to thank the WellMed Charitable Foundation for putting all of this stuff together and podcasts and everything they do at their SOS centers, and hope that you will take advantage of whatever you can. So I want to thank you.